Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to meet with you all and present uh, some information about Skylo and how it can be helpful in the Australian market. Um, I think the first thing I'd like to say is, why does Skylo exist? And I think it's important to note that we have a well-grounded mission, and that can be easily stated in sort of three simple statements here. The first one being that, and I'm sorry, my image is obscuring the commentary here, but the first one is that of course there is a huge opportunity for additional coverage over the surface of the Earth. And if you think about countries like the United States, countries like Australia and others, you can imagine the massive amount of opportunity for NTN to provide critical services in areas where terrestrial networks just don't reach. The second mission statement was that we wanted to be able to work in a way that was collaborative with carriers. The typical experience between satellite and terrestrial networks is that they don't interoperate well together, such that it was important for our product to be successful that in fact they needed to be able to operate well together. So we believe that we've solved that through the use of what we call MSS spectrum, which is a purpose-built spectrum block designed for direct-to-device communication. And then lastly, in satellite communications, the hardware is typically bespoke, very expensive, and not used by the consumer. One, it's usually built for purposes specific to an application or implementation that just doesn't help reach scale. As we've looked to develop this solution, we've worked on staying closely aligned with the 3GPP Release 17 standards to be standards-based. And what that means is that the industry is just naturally innovating in our direction. So that means more and more devices will be available, helping us achieve ubiquity and scale going forward. So these are the three core tenets of what Skylo is trying to solve for: massive connectivity and coverage around the world, friendly interoperability with carriers around the world, and of course, hardware and devices that everyday users might have in their pockets today. So when we talk about who we are a geostationary network. We provide direct-to-device connectivity over that network. We use a number of satellite providers over 4 continents and 34 countries. We have some 50 million square kilometers covered globally, and of course, Australia being one of those countries. And what's important is that we don't need special hardware in order to unlock that coverage. So because of the unique partnerships that we have with our satellite partnerships globally, we're able to expand quickly, provide continuous and contiguous service, which is one of the benefits of using geostationary satellites. And of course, as I mentioned, given that it's a standards-based solution, it means that we can use the smartphone that's in the pocket of a user today. So what do I mean by direct-to-device? And this is a word that, or a term that a lot of folks are using these days to describe satellite services. And I think for those of us who are close to it, it makes a lot of sense. But what does it actually mean? So, essentially what we're doing is we're taking a consumer-grade product and connecting it to satellites some, 32,000 kilometers away from Earth, and offering services like two-way text messaging and carrier-native SMS, location sharing, geo sharing, app data, and SOS. We also offer the ability to be able to seamlessly switch between cellular and satellite. And this is a really important point, just to pause on for a moment. When you are using MSS spectrum, mobile satellite spectrum is what MSS stands for. It essentially means that we do not require any spectrum from the carrier, the terrestrial carrier, in order to operate like some of the alternatives. In fact, we bring spectrum to the equation, which is great. I mean, it's a huge capital expense that carriers go to acquire spectrum in the first place. And what's really interesting here is that, of course, when you use MSS spectrum, as we do, it means that you also avoid the terrestrial spectrum interference issues that you run into consistently when you try and deploy them to satellite services. And that's a big, big problem for the industry, is how to make these networks interoperate properly together, as I explained at the top of the deck. And one way to do that is to use the right type of spectrum. And in our case, MSS spectrum was the choice, the clear choice. We're really proud of the fact that not only can we offer coverage to users with, consumer-grade smartphones in their pocket or IoT devices in their pocket, but we can do it everywhere. And I think that's a really big point of differentiation. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. I've talked a little bit about the need for no need for extra hardware. Of course, as the team has been working really hard to engage, chipset makers, handset makers, carrier partners, all the way from the bottom of the supply chain all the way to the top. Which means that the addressable market between consumer and IoT enterprise is huge. As you can see, the addressable market, some 2.5 billion devices a year. Giving those devices away to add dual mode connectivity to any cellular device, I think, is a really powerful opportunity. When we talk about direct-to-device, particularly on the consumer side, what this slide is essentially saying is that Skylo provides the wholesale service on the back end. We operate an end-to-end service, as I mentioned, with certified devices on the Skylo network. The relationship with the consumer and at the point of sale remains the relationship held between the consumer and the carrier. So we are an extension of the network, not a replacement of your network. So for all intents and purposes, the go-to-market model is controlled by the carrier in terms of how they package and bundle, such that they can provide the right combination of services for users that include NTN without the interference of Skylo, for lack of a better term. So we are there to support the carrier, as a network provider in a way that is collaborative and also complementary. So when you think about what the use cases look like, this one, generally tends to be one of the first examples that a lot of folks think of. And you think of the curious and the explorers, the adventurers. You think about those places that are a long distance from the edge of a terrestrial network, and using satellite services gives you the ability to stay connected and stay in communication, and it really unlocks, I think, the power of the network and the service provider and the relationship the service provider has with the user to be able to say to that consumer that you essentially will never lose coverage. And we think that that's a really powerful mission statement. And thinking about the relationship between consumers and the huge country of Australia, you can imagine the potential, particularly in the way you position go-to-market, the way you might position marketing and marketing communications to consumers about the value of being able to offer the continuity of that connectivity and coverage throughout the entire Australian nation is really powerful, of course. But not only do we operate where the network ends, we are also, a complete network overlay. We're able to fill in the micro holes and the dead zones and the network coverage, such that as the network needs to scale up and scale down, or in the event of natural disaster, what have you, the Skylo network can work immediately adjacent to the terrestrial network in country, because we don't need to have a guard band. We don't need to stand back from that network to avoid interference. We can fill in those micro holes in order to be able to offer that complete coverage pattern beyond just in the places where people don't go. We can still support a network in a dense urban area. What you're seeing here is an image of the 5 boroughs in New York, and there are a number of places. There are a number of places here in this geographic area that we support today, and this is arguably one of the most densely populated regions on the planet. So that's a little bit about how the service works and what it is that we do and how we offer it. But I think it's important when you are building a strategy around any product that you understand what users are actually looking for. So we serviced 1,000 US consumers, and I recognize that I'm speaking to an Australian audience here, but what I can share with you is that my role is to manage partnerships globally for Skylo. I'm an Australian who lives in the United States, and I can see the similarities between this data and the usefulness in the Australian market very clearly. So let me just preface what I'm about to share with you in that regard, because I think it's important that this data feels relevant for you. But in any case, we asked 1,000 US consumers, how frequently they lost coverage and how it impacts their lives. And the feedback that we got, is really interesting. I'd like to share some of that with you now. So 76% of Americans reported feeling frustrated, anxious, or unsafe due to poor cell service. And I think that the point here is that the availability of terrestrial networks is pretty dense. I mean, it's pretty much everywhere you need it to go. But in fact, they are experiencing network outages, or where they can't reach the network. They are experiencing anxiety and frustration relative to that experience. And there's a couple of key words in here: anxious, unsafe due to poor cell phone service. These are key words, and we continue to build on that. And of course, I recognize that no terrestrial network is perfect, and consumers are often very demanding in terms of their needs. But it's when they don't have the network often is when they need it the most, and the data here will reveal that. So 59% consistently face poor signal, and 20% experience it daily. So the frequency of this experience is, from my perspective, was more acute than I first realized. And we had always suspected that, there were a lot of consumers who experienced poor coverage, but whether or not, this information, statistically, if you go back into the sort of network data, whether statistically this holds up is sort of immaterial. I think the point here that we're making, or that the consumer is making, is that this is their experience. They experience these kinds of outages, and this is real feedback. So it's really important for us to take account of this, because I think what we see in the data versus what the user's experience is where the opportunity to market together exists, and we feel strongly about that point. And then 46% face coverage gaps in their neighborhoods, and this reinforces this point around the network overlay that I was describing earlier. So they experience it in their neighborhoods, on the way to work, and visiting their friends. A network outage could be at the bottom of your driveway. It could be in your backyard. It could be, on a particular portion of the highway between home and family. It doesn't always have to be, on the backside of the terrestrial network where the city ends and the country begins. So that reinforces to us the need to be able to operate in a way where we can infill, close those coverage gaps, because it's happening a lot. And then this slide really starts to unpack and get to the point around, okay, so with all of that in mind, what is it that consumers are looking for? What are they anxious about? How do they feel unsafe? So 93% highlighted peace of mind, improved safety, or staying connected to loved ones as the biggest benefits. And the biggest benefits, which we'll talk about in a moment, dovetail off of this statement around peace of mind and improved safety. And I think that, when I made the comment earlier about users, sort of needing coverage at, or experiencing a coverage gap when they need coverage the most, that's where this notion of, feeling anxious and, feeling a sense of peace of mind or comfort comes from. And you can see the data, 93% highlighted that this was a major, major concern for them. So to unpack that further, 50% said their most critical use case was emergency contact. 20% said their most critical use case was navigation. So let's just stop here for a second. So 50% said most critical use case was emergency contact. I'm late, I'm in trouble, please send help. Whatever it may be, they need to know that they can still reach someone in order to get assistance if they need it. On the other hand, 20% also said their most critical use case was navigation. So I found myself in a place I'm not familiar with. I've lost the ability to be able to use maps, but I'm going to use satellite services to be able to help me navigate back to where I need to be. And there's some real comfort in knowing that you can do that. And then, of course, I think, a lot of people might think also that, NTN services, the experience should be very similar to what you might have on a cellular device inside of a terrestrial network. Really what they're looking for is not the ability to be able to post to social media. They want to know that when the network is out, when they're outside of coverage for whatever reason, that they can get in touch with the right people or they can find their way back to safety. We also think about the experiences that that might unlock, and of course you can think about trackers for children. You can think about folks who are out exploring, extreme sports out in the back of, the country somewhere. Folks that are really trying to push the boundaries or stay contacted, or perhaps are introducing a little bit of a thrill into their life, such that they want to know if they get hurt, that they've got help at the push of a button. And we are also taking a lot of interest from three main verticals here. The first being consumer, excuse my little bubble here, the automotive industry, and of course IoT. So we're primarily focused on these three main verticals, and of course, the imagination really is the limit when it comes to the implementations here, in particular IoT. So that seamless connectivity between cellular and satellite unlocks a massive opportunity. You could think about vital assets that, in far northwest of Australia, or, perhaps out, across the Nullarbor Plain, that just have never had an opportunity to be connected before, that are now within reach. And that spans, I think, every vertical: energy, automotive, trucking, logistics, maritime pipelines. I mean, you understand better than I do, but we feel strongly that, when you can take very small devices that are standards-based, that require very low power, that work on an NB-IoT protocol, the opportunities to connect things outside the terrestrial network is a massive, massive opportunity, one we're all very excited about. So coming back to smartphones, when we think about the consumer side of things, we are not a stub app. It's not a download. We are deeply integrated into Android 15. We've been working collaboratively with the Android team in Mountain View for a couple of years now, leading up to the Android 15 release, to work on any number of things. Of course, SMS, location sharing, but also the user interface, the way the device finds the satellite in the first instance, are all in partnership between Skylo and Android. So we are deeply, deeply integrated into all of the Android smartphones you've come to know and love. We'll talk a little bit about how it works now, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. And for those of you who are a little bit more technical in nature, this should really resonate with you. But when we talk about our network, what we're talking about is an array of satellites in geostationary orbit, together with our own proprietary RAN here on Earth, co-located at these Earth stations around the world, some 10 of them spanning the Earth. We support that, of course, with our own network core and 24/7 NOC. So we are an enterprise-grade network, much smaller than perhaps the ones you're familiar with in terms of the total amount of equipment, but spanning a much, much larger geography than any other network on the planet. 34 countries, as I mentioned earlier, 4 continents. And when you start to unpack the topology of our network, you can see two halves here. The top half and the bottom half of this chart speaks to two different things. The top half is the Skylo network. The bottom half is the terrestrial network. You can imagine this being any terrestrial provider you can think of around the world and in Australia. And you might see that there are a number of similarities between our network topology and the ones along the bottom. And this is where the team, the engineering team, and the founders did an incredible job of taking the challenge of communicating over satellites with consumer-grade hardware and simplifying it such that any carrier can take advantage of it quickly, efficiently, and without the need for a task force burning hundreds of thousands of people hours to get it working. This is essentially a roaming agreement. Some of you might recognize the term here, S6A and S8 interconnects for home routing. That's essentially how you interconnect with any other roaming carrier that you might have a partnership with anywhere in the world. So it's a known movement with an organization already designed to support it. What this does is it takes the complexity out of enabling satellite connectivity for your consumers and puts it into a motion that you are already very, very familiar with. So when you think about what I've described here, we have an ecosystem of hardware supported by an array of chipset makers, Qualcomm, MediaTek, Samsung, Sony, as you can see, cascading across the page here into consumer-grade smartphones, into wearables, into automotive, and of course into IoT, unlocking a massive, addressable market. And we have, in fact, certified 80% of the world's most popular chipsets to enable that addressable market. So we are well on our way to that scale that I was talking about at the top of the meeting in terms of bringing on more and more devices that will be able to access this going forward. So I want to say a big thank you to the team, and Michelle, thank you for, again, having me here today. I appreciate it very much. My email address is listed here on the page if anyone would like to reach out if they have any questions. But I hope everybody gets an opportunity to enjoy the rest of the material prepared by the team here. So thank you, and with that, I'll say goodbye.